Hi, I'm Leon Lovelace, and this is Unstoppable Force. I got a news story for you, and it's related to Trump, and well, a lot of it's based on President Trump and him pulling out the Paris Climate Agreement today. And of course, I needed to rant about how he's a fucking idiot, and there's absolutely no good reason for him to do this shit. So, of course, a lot of the shit he does is illogical and unreasonable and irresponsible and just hypocritical. But here's one of the disastrous decisions that he's made. And he's going to, of course, make a few more disastrous decisions. But I'll hype the rant about those when he makes those. But this one is just going to be a fucking disaster. Because at the time, it was 2 years ago, a lot of the experts, the climate scientists and other just experts in the field, they talked about how the climate agreement wasn't strong enough because it didn't impose enough regulations on emissions, especially carbon emissions, and it wasn't binding. It wasn't mandatory for nations to beholden to these regulations. So even though it wasn't good enough, it was still good for pretty much all the nations in the world. 195 of the nations agreed to it and said they were gonna, try to abide by these rules and try to cut down some of their emissions that they let out as a nation. So all that was good. So of course we want a little more, but now Trump, being a fucking idiot, pulls out thinking that it's going to help American jobs. It's not going to fucking help American jobs. The coal industry's not coming back. Some of the industries that do pollute, they're not going to say, oh, well, since I could pollute more into the environment, now I can hire more people. That shit doesn't fucking happen. But it's not just about Trump pulling out of this climate agreement, because our climate's been in a fucking disaster. We've had terrible climate regulations for the last 10 20 plus years. One example of this is the Great Barrier Reefs. So I got a story for you from The Guardian. And one man named Richard Vevers, he's the chief executive of the Ocean Agency, a nonprofit company he founded to raise awareness of environmental problems. So what he does, he travels around the world and he documents all the dead and dying coral reefs. Probably some other environmental problems too. But it just says he documents dying coral reefs. And he quotes this right here. It was the smell that really got to diver Richard Bevers, the smell of death on the reef. I can't even tell you how bad I smelt after the dive. The smell of millions of rotting animals. Alright, here's another one of his quotes. It was one of the most disgusting sights I've ever seen, he says. The hard corals were dead and covered in algae, looking like they've been dead for years. The soft corals were still dying and the flesh of animals was decomposing and dripping off the reef structure. So what happens is the coral reefs, they're really sensitive to the water temperature, and when the water temperature gets above a certain limit, they start dying out. Because what happens is the coral polyps, they get stressed and then spit out the algae that live inside them. Because it's like two organisms that live in one structure. Without the colorful algae, the coral flesh becomes transparent. And the algae provide the coral with 90% of its energy, so it starves. It says, unless the temperature quickly returns to normal, the coral dies and gets taken over by a blanket of seaweed. Once that happens, it could take a decade for the coral to recover. And even then, the recovery depends on the reef not being hit by other stressors, such as water pollution. And this is what I talk about when I talk about how we need to protect the environment, because a lot of organisms rely on other organisms for food or shelter. Because when the coral dies, the entire ecosystem around it transforms. Fish that feed on the coral use it as shelter or nibble on the algae that grow among it die or move away. The bigger fish that feed on those fish disappear too. But the cascading effects don't stop there. Birds that eat fish lose their energy source, and island plants that thrive on bird droppings can be depleted. Of course, people who rely on reefs for food, income, or shelter from waves, or all three, some 500 million people worldwide lose their vital resource. It has some. This article is from 2016, so it's maybe a year old. But I got other. Of course, I'm going to talk about other environmental issues, kind of related to Trump pulling out the Paris Agreement, but a lot of them are, a little bit older because we've been having environmental problems for decades. So I'm gonna kind of tie it in with Trump pulling out of the agreement, but this has been a problem for decades and decades. So we actually need to work on making sure we could move towards making our lifestyle where it's more. We need to transform to a more sustainable lifestyle, because as more and more people are living on the earth, we're actually crowding and killing out all the natural resources and natural ecosystems that we need to make sure that the world just can keep a sustainable cycle going. Okay, what's at stake here is the largest living structure in the world and by far the largest coral reef system. The oft-repeated cliche is that it can be seen from space, which is not surprising given it stretches more than 2,300 kilometers in length. Between its almost 3,000 individual reefs, covers an area about the size of Germany. It is an underwater world of an unimaginable scale. With 1,600 species of fish, 130 types of sharks and rays, more than 30 species of whales and dolphins, it is one of the most complex ecosystems on the planet. When this point right here goes to what I was referring to in one of my other videos about how Native Americans, how Native people and indigenous people, they have a different mindset about the world around them. Because right here it talks about going back for millennia, indigenous Australians have relied on the Great Barrier Reef. As the world emerged from the last ice age about 20,000 years ago and sea levels began to rise, indigenous Australians moved off the area that was once a floodplain, but have watched as today's Great Barrier Reef formed. Today there are more than 70 indigenous groups with a connection to the reef, many of whom depend on it for their livelihoods. So it's not just businesses that get money from tourism from the Great Barrier Reef, but these indigenous groups and just local people rely on it for, food and income. I can't believe I haven't read an article about this before, but this article also talks about how in bleaching for the coral reefs isn't a new phenomenon at all. That in fact, the first instances that were documented was in 1911 in the Florida Keys. Then it was also reported on the Great Barrier Reef in 1929. But there was a major bleaching in 1979, where it was a regional widespread bleaching, and that was seen in the Caribbean and the Florida Keys. And of course, this is way after the Industrial Revolution started, so it really started ramping up. Then it also says here that a paper in 1990 warned that these events were being caused by climate change, and bleaching would probably continue and increase until coral-dominated reefs no longer exist. So then there's another bleaching event in 82, one in 87. It's a really large one in 97 and 98, which that was actually a record because it was an extreme El Nino. El Ninos make the water a lot warmer than normal. And of course, 2016, and it'll probably go on to 2017 also. But also checked out a different website, and they talked about how this current bleaching is from 2014 to this year. So we have a fucking climate disaster on our hands. And yes, we need to push our politicians to start fighting to have some quality environmental regulations to make sure that we have a working environment for our children and for our ancestors 7 generations down the line. So it's not just about we have to push our politicians to do this. We have to start making sacrifices ourselves and making changes so we can also make the environment a little bit better. Even though I know people say, it's hard and it's difficult, you don't want to give things up, but that's what it's going to take, because if you wait for the government to do it, they're going to have to restrict some of your, they're going to have to place some restrictions on you. So it's better to get out in front of it and start making those changes now, because it's inevitable. We have to get this done. I've done a few changes, like I've started to eat less meat because of course clearing natural habitats really upsets our environmental balance, especially for livestock, for eating beef and pork and chicken. So I eat less beef than I used to. I eat less chicken and turkey than I did before. I also drink less milk too. That was a big thing. I've started to move to almond milk. I've cut down on almond milk. I've cut down on regular milk. I'm about cut down to about a third of the normal milk that I used to drink. So at least a third of the milk I drink now is almond milk. Also drive less. I quit the job I was at before. I was a driver for Domino's. Said, you know what, I need to stop driving as much so I'm not polluting as much. Of course, all those things just doesn't add up to that much carbon, because I'm only one of 330 million people that live in the United States, and one of 7.3 billion people that live in the world. So it's not just about me cutting back, but we all need to cut back to make sure that we all can live in this world. because as everybody knows, the world population is not going down anytime soon. It's just growing at an exponential rate. So this is mandatory that we all need to help each other and cut back on all the pollution that we ourselves create. Because individually we can't do it, but together we can do a lot of things. And this is one thing we can do. Alright, so thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and also donate to my GoFundMe page. I got a GoFundMe. I'm going to put a link down below. Alright, thanks a lot. Also forgot to mention earlier that NPR, I listen to NPR quite a lot, and they keep talking about how Trump's passing these policies or pushing for this agenda because he wants to satisfy supporters. What the fuck? He's a pathological liar that's short-sighted and only cares about himself. He's not passing any laws, or he's not pushing for any policies to help his supporters. He's doing every policy and any laws that he would like. He's pushing those for his fucking donors, for himself, for his wealthy buddies, and that's it. He's not doing anything for his supporters, and they keep talking about how, he's doing this for his supporters, he's pushing this for his supporters, all this fucking bullshit, and they keep saying this like he's an honest actor. He's not an honest actor, like Obama, like Hillary Clinton, like George Bush. They weren't honest actors. A lot of them are fucking liars, and they're pushing a lot of these laws and these policies for themselves, for their donors, and that's about it.